My name is Jennifer Miller. At 34, I'm just another financial analyst at Global Investments and Ventures, sitting at my desk on the 22nd floor, surrounded by gray partitions and the constant clatter of keyboard keys. The clock shows 7:30 in the morning when Victoria Williams, my supervisor, walks by my desk and doesn't even spare me a glance, deliberately knocking over a pile of reports that need to be reviewed by the end of the day. Miller, I need all of this analyzed yesterday, and please try not to mess it up this time. I take a deep breath, grab the documents, and smile politely. Sure, Victoria, I'll have everything ready today. Victoria walks away with her imported coffee and high heels clicking down the hallway. She has no idea that I'm here by choice. No one knows, except for my lawyer, Sarah, my accountant, Robert, and my brother, Brian. Everyone believes I'm just Jennifer Miller, a financial analyst with an average salary and a 2010 Honda Civic parked in the basement. No one suspects that I own 60% of the company's shares. Even Thomas, my husband and CEO of Global Investments, doesn't know my true identity. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. 3 years ago, I received the news that would change everything. My father, founder of Global Investments, had unexpectedly passed away. At his will reading, I learned that he had left me the majority control of the company. Sarah, our longtime lawyer, handed me a letter he wrote before he left. Dear Jennifer, I'm giving you something more valuable than money. I'm giving you the chance to learn how our company really works from the ground up. Don't just trust the reports or what the executives tell you. Get to know every cog in the machine. Only then will you be able to decide whether to lead or sell. I spent weeks figuring out what to do. The company was worth billions. I could simply sell my shares and live comfortably for the rest of my life. But something in my father's letter resonated with me. Sarah, I want you to make all the legal arrangements to keep my inheritance a secret, I finally decided. I'm going to start at the bottom, just like my father suggested. And so Jennifer Miller, the heiress, disappeared. In her place emerged Jennifer Miller, the financial analyst with a degree in economics and modest market experience. I landed the job without any special connections. I went through the same hiring process as any other candidate and started learning everything about the company that technically belonged to me. I met Thomas Johnson 6 months after I started at the company. It was at an end-of-year corporate event where I was analyzing how the board of directors behaved with the lower-level employees. Thomas was different from the other executives, or so I initially thought. He stopped at my desk, asked my name, and unlike Victoria, he seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. We started dating discreetly. I never revealed who I really was. A part of me hoped he had fallen for the real Jennifer, not the heiress of Global Investments. We got married after a year of dating, keeping our connection relatively private within the company. I'd rather people not think I got my position just for being the CEO's wife, I explained when he suggested that I might take on a better role. At home, Thomas would openly talk about the company, its challenges and plans. I listened carefully, comparing what he said with what I saw every day. Gradually, inconsistencies began to emerge. Small comments about disposable employees, decisions made for immediate financial convenience rather than the long-term good of the company. At night, while lying in our bed, he discussed strategies and mergers while I stored every piece of information, slowly realizing that his vision for Global Investments was drifting further and further away from the values my father had established. After 2 years of silent observation, I started noticing the structural problems at Global Investments. The company was hemorrhaging money in inefficient departments and poorly managed projects. Victoria, my supervisor, was the perfect example of incompetence being well paid, kept on board because of her connections, not merit. I secretly began developing Project Richardson, named in honor of my mother's maiden name. For months, I worked after hours, compiling data and creating a complete restructuring proposal. The project would cut waste, optimize operations, and inevitably eliminate redundant positions, including Victoria's. When I finally gathered the courage to submit the project anonymously to the Innovation Committee, someone leaked it to Thomas, who was impressed. He announced the project in a departmental meeting, giving me public credit. I watched Victoria's face contort in disbelief and anger. How did a simple analyst develop something so complex? She questioned in front of everyone. Are you sure you didn't have outside help? Thomas defended the project enthusiastically. It's exactly what we need for the next quarter, he stated, though I could see something calculating in his gaze that I had never noticed before. 2 weeks after the presentation of Project Richardson, I began noticing subtle changes. Victoria would avoid making eye contact with me. Colleagues stopped talking when I walked by, and Thomas started coming home later and later, always with excuses about important meetings. On a Friday, I was called into the conference room. Thomas was there, along with Victoria and 2 security guards. On the table were documents I'd never seen before, along with screenshots of emails I didn't recognize. Jennifer, Thomas began in his CEO voice, not as my husband. We have evidence that you leaked confidential information to our competitors. Victoria flashed a subtle smile as she placed what were supposedly emails of mine, showing me sending details of Project Richardson to the competition on the table. They were clearly fabricated, but convincing enough for anyone who didn't know the truth. This is absurd, I protested. I would never do that. The evidence is conclusive, Thomas continued coldly. You're fired, effective immediately. The security team will accompany you to collect your belongings. I was escorted out of the building like a criminal, watched by dozens of shocked colleagues. That very night, Thomas arrived home with divorce papers, claiming he couldn't stay married to someone who betrayed not only the company, but also his trust. As he spoke, I realized that the conspiracy was perfect. They had eliminated me because my project threatened their own interests. What they didn't know was that I was just getting started. I spent the first 3 days after my firing in a state of shock, alternating between anger and disbelief. Thomas quickly cleared out his belongings from our apartment while I was in Sarah's office, seeking legal advice. He has no idea who you really are, Sarah said, serving me tea as we spread documents out on her office table. You're still the majority shareholder. You could reverse all of this right now. I shook my head. Not yet. I want to see how far this goes. I want to understand what's really happening in my father's company. Sarah looked at me with concern. Jennifer, this is going to hurt. They're going to ruin your reputation. Let them try, I replied. In the meantime, let's monitor every move they make. That's how my period of observation began. Robert, my accountant, discreetly hacked into my old work computer. As a financial analyst, I had access to a considerable amount of data that was now being manipulated. Through remote access, we managed to record every change made to Project Richardson. For 2 weeks, I watched from afar as Thomas and Victoria systematically dismantled my work. They removed the transparency clauses, eliminated cuts for unnecessary expenses, and most alarmingly, rerouted substantial funds to offshore accounts through shell companies. Look at this. Robert pointed at the screen of his laptop during one of our secret meetings at a quiet cafe. They're diverting nearly $30 million to a holding in the Cayman Islands. The digital signature is Victoria's, but the authorization came straight from Thomas's email. I documented everything meticulously. Every day the pattern became clearer. They weren't just dismantling my project. They were using my firing as a smokescreen for a larger corporate fraud scheme that had probably been going on for years. In the second week, the first news reports began to surface in the financial press. Global Investments implements a revolutionary restructuring. In the photos, Thomas was smiling next to Victoria, presented as the architect behind the company's revitalization plan. My project, with my name completely erased. I received calls from former colleagues who were confused. Some believed the accusations against me, while others suspected something was off. I kept silent with all of them. On the 13th night after my firing, I was sitting alone in my apartment analyzing documents when I got an unexpected text message from Melissa, the secretary in the accounting department. I know you didn't do what they're saying. I saw Victoria logging into your computer after hours, days before you were fired. I have it recorded on my phone. That was the last piece I needed. The next day, I called Sarah. It's time. Schedule an extraordinary board meeting for tomorrow at 10 a.m. As the majority shareholder, it's my right. They won't like that, Sarah warned. They'll like it a lot less than what comes next, I replied, gathering all of my evidence into one folder. The sun had barely risen when I arrived at the Global Investments building the next morning. Sarah was waiting for me at the entrance, looking sharp in her navy blue suit, a leather briefcase under her arm. At her side was Robert, my accountant, with a sober and determined expression. "Everyone is waiting in the main conference room," Sarah informed me as we rode the private elevator. "Thomas is furious. He tried to cancel the meeting 3 times since yesterday. And what about the rest of the board? They're confused but present. Victoria is there too, though she isn't a board member." I took a deep breath as the elevator slowed down. Let's do this right, just as my father would have. The doors opened directly into the president's corridor. I walked along the dark red carpet, past portraits of the company's past presidents. My father's portrait was second to last. Thomas had had his logo put up right after he took over headquarters. When we entered the meeting room, silence fell immediately. 12 pairs of eyes turned to me. Thomas sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of controlled indignation. Victoria stood behind him, arms crossed, with a smirk of scorn on her lips. "Jennifer," Thomas began, his voice deliberately polite in front of the other executives, "this meeting has been called irregularly. You have no authority to be here, let alone interrupt the board's activities." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked slowly to the other end of the table and placed my folder on the glossy surface. Sarah and Robert discreetly took positions on either side of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," I began calmly, completely ignoring Thomas, "thank you for being here this morning. I know this meeting is out of the blue." "This is absurd," Victoria interrupted. "This woman was fired for cause 2 weeks ago, for stealing intellectual property and breaching confidentiality." I smiled subtly. "It's interesting that you mentioned that, Victoria. Theft and breach. Those are exactly the topics we're going to cover today." I opened my folder and pulled out a document on the company's official letterhead. "This is the title deed to Global Investments and Ventures. As you can verify, I own 60% of the company's shares. I inherited them from my father, Anthony Miller, the founder and ex-president." The silence that followed was profound. I looked directly at Thomas, whose face was visibly paling. His eyes widened in understanding and horror. "That's impossible," he managed to stammer finally. "You're just what, Thomas, a financial analyst? Your ex-wife?" I kept my voice firm. "For 3 years, I've been working undercover at this company to understand it from the inside out, just as my father requested. It was the only condition he set for my inheritance." The board members began murmuring among themselves. One of them, Dr. Peterson, a longtime friend of my father, slowly stood up. Anthony was always a shrewd man. He never revealed who would be his successor. "This is a farce," Victoria advanced, but Thomas stopped her with a gesture, his mind clearly calculating the implications. "Sarah," I called, "please distribute the verification documents to all the board members." As Sarah handed out the folders containing the legal documents that proved my identity, I continued, "But we're not here just to announce my position as the majority shareholder. We're here to discuss a systematic pattern of fraud, fund diversion, and corporate sabotage." Robert turned on the projector. On the screen appeared the first of dozens of pieces of evidence we had collected. "This is a bank transfer record for $7.2 million moved from the company's operating account to a holding in the Cayman Islands made 3 days after my firing." I clicked to the next image. "And here's the confirmation that that holding belongs to Thomas Johnson and Victoria Williams in equal parts." The room fell into a stunned silence as I continued presenting evidence after evidence. I showed the forged emails created to frame me, including metadata that proved they were fabricated. I displayed access logs showing Victoria breaking into my computer after hours. I presented recordings of phone calls between Thomas and executives from a competing investment fund, negotiating personal favors in exchange for insider information. Over the past 3 years, while I was silently observing, Thomas and Victoria diverted approximately $118 million in corporate funds, I concluded, looking each board member in the eye. Not only that, They deliberately sabotaged promising projects that didn't serve their personal interests, causing the company an estimated market loss of nearly $500 million. Thomas finally stood up, his face now red with rage. You planned all of this? We got married, shared a life, and it was all part of your game. No, Thomas, I replied calmly. When we met, I genuinely believed I had found someone who shared my father's vision for this company. It was you who turned our marriage into a sham when you decided to frame me and discard me as soon as you realized my project was threatening your scheme. Victoria, realizing the situation was falling apart, tried to edge toward the door. Robert immediately blocked her path. This is absurd, she tried one last time. Thomas, tell them it's all a lie. Thomas looked at her with disdain. You said the documents were undetectable, that no one would be able to trace the transfers back to us. The atmosphere in the room grew even heavier with that implicit admission. You used me, Victoria retorted, her voice rising an octave. It was all your idea from the start. I was just following orders. As the two began accusing each other, Dr. Peterson banged his fist on the table with authority. Enough! Jennifer, what exactly do you intend to achieve with this revelation? Justice and restoration, I replied simply. As the majority shareholder, I am officially removing Thomas Johnson from his position as CEO of Global Investments, effective immediately. Victoria Williams is also hereby terminated. Furthermore, I signaled to Sarah, who opened the conference room door. 2 federal agents entered, followed by a representative from the Securities and Exchange Commission. Furthermore, I continued, all the evidence of fraud, market manipulation, and fund diversion has been handed over to the proper authorities. Thomas turned completely pale. You can't do this. I'm your husband. Ex-husband, I corrected calmly. And yes, I can. In fact, it's my legal obligation. The agents stepped forward, reading Thomas's rights as they handcuffed his wrists. Victoria began to cry, while Thomas remained silently stunned. As they were escorted out, Thomas paused briefly by my side. You played your cards very well, Jennifer. I never suspected. It wasn't a game for me, Thomas. It was my father's company. It was our life together. You turned it all into a sham. After the detained were led out, I turned back to the stunned board. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a lot of work ahead. I suggest a short recess, then we'll begin the restructuring that this company so desperately needs. 6 months have passed since that fateful board meeting. Today, from the window of my office on the top floor, the same one that belonged to my father, I watched the new global investments and ventures taking shape. The first few weeks were chaotic. The arrest of the CEO and the chief operating officer made headlines in every financial newspaper in the country. The shares plummeted at first, but my decision to be completely transparent about the problems and the planned solutions quickly reversed the trend. I implemented Project Richardson in its original form, not the watered-down version that Thomas and Victoria had presented. We eliminated waste, restructured inefficient departments, and made heavy investments in innovation and the development of internal talent. Melissa, the secretary who sent me the crucial recording of Victoria, now heads our renewed compliance department. Integrity must be rewarded, I explained, when some questioned her promotion. She risked everything to do what was right, even when winning seemed impossible. I established a new corporate code of ethics and an anonymous whistleblowing channel that reports directly to an independent board. We created a profit-sharing program for all employees, from interns to directors. When the company prospers, everyone prospers, I announced at our first General Assembly after the restructuring. The results came faster than anyone expected. By the 3rd month, our shares had regained their pre-scandal value. By the 5th month, we surpassed our historical high. Today, half a year later, Global Investments is cited in business publications as a prime example of successful corporate transformation. The Miller method, as some financial journalists have dubbed our approach, combines rigorous efficiency with genuine empathy. We didn't cut jobs indiscriminately as many restructurings do. Instead, we reallocated talent, invested in training, and created new opportunities within the company itself. I received astronomical offers to buy my shares, but I turned them all down. This isn't just a company to me, I explained in a recent interview. It's my father's legacy, built with a long-term vision, not with short-sighted greed. Today, as I walk through the corridors, employees who once barely noticed my presence now greet me by name, not out of fear or sycophancy, but with a genuine respect that only comes from actions, not titles. In what used to be Victoria's office, there now operates our Social Innovation Lab, where we develop projects to apply our financial expertise to complex social issues. In Thomas's formerly luxurious office, we've created a community library and study space for employees' children. But the real transformation isn't just in the numbers or the structure, it's in the culture. Where there used to be fear and cutthroat competition, there is now collaboration and shared purpose. Where decisions used to be made behind closed doors by a select few, there is now transparency and broad participation. Your approach is radical for Wall Street, a consultant commented during our last strategic meeting. It's not radical, I corrected. It's just human. And surprisingly, it works. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. This morning, as I do every Monday, I parked my 2010 Honda Civic in the same spot I used when I was an analyst. I walked through the main lobby, greeted the security guards by name, and took the regular elevator up to the 22nd floor. There, I walked over to the old analyst's area and sat at one of the empty desks with my lunch from home. It's a ritual I stick to religiously, a reminder of where it all began, of the lessons I learned on the factory floor of corporate finance. Some executives find it odd that the company president sometimes eats among the analysts instead of in the private office with a view of Central Park. To me, it's essential. Today, as I opened my lunchbox, Liam, a young, newly hired analyst, approached hesitantly. "Mrs. Miller," he said nervously, "sorry to bother you, but I wanted to thank you for the opportunity. I was rejected by 12 companies before this one because my college wasn't prestigious enough. This was the only place that really looked at my work, not just my resume." I smiled, recognizing in him the same spark I had when I started. "The best insights rarely come from predictable places, Liam. My father used to say that true innovation comes from the margins, not the center." After he left, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The trial of Thomas and Victoria started last month. The evidence against them is irrefutable. Their lawyers tried to negotiate deals, but the prosecutor, seeing the extent of the fraud, refused to offer lenient conditions. They face up to 15 years in prison. I don't feel joy about it, only a sad sense of justice being done. Thomas sent me several letters from prison, some pleading, others accusatory. I didn't reply to any. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. Some forms of betrayal cut too deep. At the end of the day, I returned to my office for one final meeting. The team presented the preliminary results of our newest project, a financial inclusion program for communities traditionally ignored by the banking sector. It's exactly the type of initiative my father would have supported, profitable in the long run and genuinely beneficial to society. As everyone left after the presentation, I stayed behind, alone, contemplating the photo of my father on the wall. Next to it, I had his old motto placed, "Real value never lies in appearances." Perhaps that was the most valuable lesson of this entire journey. True power doesn't come from titles or positions, but from the integrity with which we exercise them. True authority isn't born of intimidation, but of genuine respect earned through consistent action. Months ago, when I was still working as an analyst, Victoria once told me disdainfully, "People like you will never make it to the top." She was wrong, not because I was already secretly at the top, but because her definition of success was fundamentally flawed. Real success isn't about being above others. It's about lifting those around you. Today, global investments is stronger than ever, not just financially, but in its very essence. We have revived my father's original vision, a company that thrives not only by generating profits, but by creating real, lasting value. As I turn off the lights in my office and get ready to drive home in my trusty Honda Civic, I feel a deep sense of fulfillment. Not because I exposed a fraud or seized power, but because I honored my father's true legacy, not a legacy of buildings or fortunes, but of principles and values. The journey wasn't what I expected. It was tougher, more painful, and ultimately more rewarding than I could have imagined. And though the road was winding and full of surprises, I feel that I finally found my place, not as an heiress, not as a CEO, but as a guardian of something greater than us all. Tomorrow, new challenges await. But today, as the elevator descends to the ground floor, I know we're finally on the right path. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this.